It began on an ordinary autumn morning in Munich, 1959. The city was quiet, still shaking off the grey of dawn. Streets glistened faintly from overnight rain, and in the narrow lanes of Schwabing, the heart of Munich's Ukrainian exile community, the air smelled faintly of coffee and coal smoke. Bohdan Stashynsky walked with measured steps, hands tucked into the pockets of a light grey trench coat. He looked like any young European professional on his way to work, clean-cut, serious, unremarkable. But inside his coat, hidden within a folded newspaper, was a weapon the world had never seen before. A slim, polished metal tube, no longer than a man's hand. When triggered, it didn't fire bullets. It released death itself, a mist of cyanide gas so fine it left no mark, no trace, no sound. The KGB had designed it specifically for him. He had rehearsed the motion hundreds of times. The turn of the wrist, the distance to target, the angle of approach. The gas would kill in seconds, leaving the victim to appear as if they had simply collapsed from heart failure. That morning, his orders were simple. Eliminate Stepan Bandera, the exiled Ukrainian nationalist leader living under an alias at 7 Kreitmayerstrasse. Bandera had been a thorn in the Soviet Union's side for decades, a symbol of resistance, a ghost of an independence movement Moscow believed it had already crushed. And now, after years of tracking him across Europe, the KGB wanted that ghost to vanish for good. As Stashynsky approached the apartment building, he spotted Bandera in the distance. A small man with a narrow face, carrying groceries, his pace brisk. Bandera was cautious, always alert. He had survived assassination attempts before, but even the careful Gro tired of looking over their shoulders. At 9:30 a.m., Bandera reached his building. Stashynsky followed him into the stairwell, each step echoing faintly in the marble corridor. For a moment, they stood alone, separated by a few paces. Bandera turned, recognizing the face behind him. Not with fear, but confusion. That's when Stashynsky raised the tube. A sharp hiss filled the narrow stairwell. A colorless jet of vapor struck Bandera in the face. He gasped, staggered backward, and collapsed. Within seconds, he was dead. No sound, no witnesses, just the faint smell of bitter almonds and the echo of footsteps fading down the stairs. When the body was discovered hours later, the police ruled it a heart attack. Only later, after Stashynsky's defection years later, would the truth come out. That Bandera had been killed not by age or fate, but by a weapon born in Moscow's laboratories, wielded by a man who once believed he was serving his country. But the story of Bohdan Stashynsky doesn't begin in Munich. It begins in a small village in western Ukraine, in the chaos of a world at war. He was born in 1931, in a region caught between two empires, Poland to the west, the Soviet Union to the east. His childhood was shaped by occupation, repression, and fear. When the Nazis invaded in 1941, his village changed flags overnight. One regime left, another arrived, each demanding loyalty, each punishing betrayal. By the time the Red Army returned in 1944, the land was scarred, its people divided between those who resisted Soviet control and those who complied to survive. Among those resisting was the Ukrainian Insurgent Army, the UPA, a nationalist force that had fought both Germans and Soviets for independence. The Soviets branded them fascists and terrorists. To many Ukrainians, they were heroes. To Moscow, they were enemies to be hunted and erased. Stashynsky was a teenager then, bright, impressionable, cautious. He had no strong political convictions, but his family's connections to Ukrainian nationalists soon drew unwanted attention from Soviet security forces. His 2 sisters were arrested for aiding the UPA. His father, a farmer, was interrogated and beaten. In 1948, at the age of 17, Bohdan was caught by Soviet authorities for riding a train without a ticket, a trivial offense that became his undoing. During questioning, he admitted to reading anti-Soviet leaflets. The NKVD, the Soviet secret police, saw an opportunity. They offered him a choice: prison or cooperation. He chose survival. That moment marked the beginning of his transformation, from a frightened village boy into a weapon of the state. Under NKVD guidance, he was trained to infiltrate nationalist circles in western Ukraine. He reported on families, neighbors, and acquaintances, learning to move quietly, to watch, to record without emotion. His handlers noticed his reliability, his ability to obey orders without question. They saw potential. In 1950, he was summoned to Kiev for further instruction, and soon after, to Moscow, to the headquarters of what was now called the KGB. There, his world changed entirely. Inside the walls of Lubyanka, he learned the craft of espionage, surveillance, disguise, coded communication, assassination techniques. He was trained to follow targets across cities, memorize routes, and kill efficiently, without hesitation. He was also taught something subtler: how to stop thinking of himself as a person. Agents were tools, not men. They served history, not conscience. By the time he completed his training, Stashynsky had become what the KGB called a special operative of active measures, a euphemism for assassin. His loyalty was absolute, or so they believed. His first major assignment came in 1957. His target was Lev Rebet, a Ukrainian nationalist writer and politician living in exile in Munich. Rebet had been one of Bandera's rivals within the Ukrainian nationalist movement, but for Moscow, such distinctions didn't matter. Both represented the same threat: the persistence of anti-Soviet thought abroad. The KGB wanted Rebet eliminated quietly, without scandal. A conventional killing, a gun, a bomb, would draw attention. They wanted something invisible. That's when Soviet engineers unveiled a new invention: the cyanide gas pistol. It looked like a rolled-up newspaper. Inside, a mechanism would release a jet of poison gas when triggered. The victim would die instantly, the cause appearing to be natural, as if they had simply collapsed. Stashynsky was chosen to test it. He studied Rebet's routines for weeks: his route to the office, his morning habits, the cafe where he read newspapers. Every step was documented and rehearsed. On the morning of October 12, 1957, Stashynsky followed Rebet into the stairwell of his office building. When the older man turned to greet him, perhaps mistaking him for a fellow émigré, Stashynsky lifted the tube and fired. Rebet fell instantly. The autopsy listed the cause as sudden heart failure. For 2 years, no one suspected a thing. The KGB was thrilled. The experiment had worked, and Stashynsky, now proven, had earned their full trust. But success came with a price. He was summoned back to Moscow, where he was personally decorated by Alexander Shelepin, head of the KGB. They praised him for precision, loyalty, and silence. They also reminded him of what failure, or disobedience, would mean. He was no longer just an agent. He was property. Over the next 2 years, Stashynsky lived in Berlin under deep cover, posing as a German citizen named Josef Lehmann. He learned the language fluently, changed his mannerisms, and reported regularly to his handlers. It was during this time that something unexpected happened, something no amount of KGB training could prepare him for. He fell in love. Her name was Inga Pohl, a young German woman from East Berlin. She worked as a typist and had no idea who he really was. When they met, she saw a quiet, polite man with kind eyes and a slight accent. She didn't know that those eyes had watched men die. The KGB disapproved. They warned him that emotional attachments were liabilities. But when he refused to end the relationship, they intervened, ordering him to reveal his identity to her. He did, expecting fear or rejection. Instead, she stayed. She told him she loved him regardless. But she made him promise one thing, that he would one day leave that life behind. For the first time, the perfect operative began to doubt. Then came new orders. His next mission: eliminate Stepan Bandera. Bandera was living in Munich under the name Popel. He was well guarded, constantly changing addresses, aware that the Soviets wanted him dead. The KGB assigned the operation to Stashynsky because he had proven capable of killing without trace. The planning took months. He memorized Bandera's schedule, his walking routes, the architecture of his building. The weapon was upgraded, a 2-barrel version of the gas pistol, more reliable than before. On October 15th, 1959, he struck. Bandera collapsed in his stairwell, just as Rebet had 2 years earlier. The autopsy, again, cited heart failure. The KGB celebrated another invisible victory. But for Stashynsky, the triumph felt hollow. When he looked at the headlines the next day, he didn't feel pride, only an ache that he couldn't explain. He had done everything perfectly, yet something inside him had cracked. After the Bandera assassination, he returned to Moscow, where he and Inga were married under KGB supervision. Their honeymoon was monitored, their letters were censored, their apartment was likely bugged. Every gesture of affection existed under the shadow of surveillance. In 1960, they were transferred back to Berlin, where the KGB hoped to keep them close. But the wall between East and West was not yet built, and the border remained porous. The couple often crossed between zones, he under false pretense, she sometimes unaware of the danger surrounding them. Over time, Inga's unease grew. She hated the constant fear, the secrecy, the way Bohdan would vanish for days without explanation. She wanted a normal life, freedom, sunlight, honesty. In August 1961, when the Berlin Wall began to rise, she saw the last chance slipping away. The city was dividing. Escape was becoming impossible. That autumn, the two made a decision that would change everything. Under the guise of a trip to East Berlin for a family visit, they crossed the border into West Germany, using false papers that Stashynsky had secretly prepared. For the first time, he was not following orders. He was running from them. They boarded a train to West Berlin, carrying only a small suitcase. Inside was a document that could topple an empire, proof of KGB assassinations carried out on Western soil. Within hours of crossing the border, Stashynsky presented himself to American authorities. "My name is Bohdan Stashynsky," he said. "I am an officer of the KGB." For Western intelligence agencies, it was the confession of a lifetime. Over the following months, he revealed the details of his missions, the training, the weapons, the operations, the orders from the highest levels of the Soviet state. He described in precise, chilling detail how the cyanide pistols worked, how the gas paralyzed the lungs within seconds, and how he had rehearsed each movement in a mirror until it became mechanical. His testimony shocked the world. Newspapers across Europe ran headlines about the KGB assassin who defected. The stories read like something out of fiction. Invisible weapons, political murders disguised as heart attacks, secret labs in Moscow. But it was all true. In 1962, he stood trial in West Germany, not as a KGB agent, but as a man confessing to murder. The courtroom was packed. Journalists filled every seat. The world wanted to see the face of the Soviet Union's invisible hand. He told his story calmly, without bravado. He didn't deny what he'd done. He explained it as obedience, the duty of a man trapped in a system that rewarded silence and punished doubt. The judges listened. They saw a man who had killed, yes, but also one who had fled his masters and risked his life to tell the truth. In the end, he was sentenced to 8 years in prison, a remarkably light punishment given his crimes. The court ruled that he had acted under orders of coercion. After his release, Stashynsky disappeared into the quiet anonymity of witness protection. Some say he took a new name, settled in South Africa, and lived the rest of his life in hiding. Others believe he was hunted down by Soviet agents and killed. No one knows for sure. What is certain is that his confession forced the world to confront the lengths to which the KGB would go to silence its enemies, and the moral void that consumed those who carried out its will. Behind the steel and ideology of the Soviet Union was a machine built on fear, and men like Bohdan Stashynsky were its gears. They believed they were serving history, but in truth, they were serving silence. The cyanide pistol that killed Rebet and Bandera was later displayed in court. A small, unremarkable device, polished and neat. Looking at it, one could hardly believe it had changed the course of Cold War history. But it had. It was proof that the invisible war between East and West wasn't fought only in codes or cables, but in alleys, stairwells, and quiet rooms where death came without warning. And at the center of it all was a man who began as a boy trying to survive an occupation, who became, through circumstance and fear, one of the deadliest assassins the KGB ever trained. He wasn't a zealot or a sadist. He was something far more dangerous, obedient. When he finally broke free, it wasn't courage that saved him. It was love. Fragile, irrational, human love. The one thing the KGB could never fully control. But even love couldn't erase what he'd done. In the years that followed, Stashynsky was a man living in exile, not just from his country, but from himself. He had betrayed his masters, his victims, and his own conscience. Somewhere, perhaps under another name, he grew old. And every time he heard the sound of footsteps behind him, he must have wondered if the people who taught him how to kill without a sound were now coming for him. Because in the world he once belonged to, no one truly leaves. And in the long shadow of the Cold War, where secrets are currency and silence is survival, Bohdan Stashynsky remains a ghost, a reminder that the deadliest assassins are not the ones who revel in killing, but the ones who believe they're just doing their job.